Warning. This edition of Where Did the Road Go may contain hidden messages, but probably not. This month's Where Did the Road Go is sponsored by the following awesome individuals: Greg Ross, Allison Cook, Super Inframan, 36 Dingo, and Michael Friske. Thank you so much for helping make this show possible.
Transmission start. Welcome to Where Did the Road Go? Join us as we wander off the path and explore lost history, consciousness, the paranormal, unexplained mysteries, alternative thought, and much more. We are present on the web at wheredidtheroadgo.com. Now here is your host, Seriah.
Welcome to this edition of Where Did the Road Go? And tonight I am joined by Ryan Kralik. And Ryan, you are working on a book, or you have a book done, right?
Just about done.
Okay. And this is about what?
Yeah, the book is about how I guess I accidentally figured out the universe. I guess this is as good a way as any to put it. It's called It From Us, and provided that a publisher doesn't have a major problem with it, it's called It From Us, an information first framework and the purpose of consciousness. And basically, it's a pretty thoroughly researched a trade book. You know, it's for regular people who like to read about this stuff, but it leans heavily on science, and basically it puts forth that the fundamental basis of the universe, of reality, is information. Mm-hmm. You know, versus like maybe kind of more of the hard sciences viewpoint is that the fundamental basis of the universe is material, matter. Right. And it kind of, it takes kind of an interesting trajectory. You know, it starts out with like, okay, well, if it's not matter, let's talk about why that is. And it gets a little bit into quantum mechanics and things like that. And then kind of moves to biology. And if you look at quantum mechanics, maybe one of the biggest claims that I think I'm making in the book is that, and I don't know how much you know about quantum mechanics.
Some.
Anytime I have this conversation, I have to start with, what do you know about quantum mechanics? And you can imagine the looks that I get.
Yeah.
But, fundamentally, quantum mechanics is kind of this idea. I mean, you've seen the diagram in the physics textbook, you know. If you shoot light through
the double slit experiment.
If you shoot, a proton or an electron, through two slits in a panel, on the other side of it, there's an interference pattern, which means it's acting like a wave. Right. But and in the diagram, it's always another piece of paper behind that piece of paper. When you do that, when you measure it, it isn't a waveform. You can actually see the particle. And the biggest claim maybe that I'm kind of making in the book is that in fact that quantum probability wave or probability cloud that exists before it's measured it isn't in fact reality, right? It's sub-reality. Okay. And it's the interface of reality with the informational substrate, the underlying basis of the universe. And so, it's not a particle until it's required to be. Right. And matter of fact, right now, I don't know if you've ever heard of him, a particle physicist named Stephen Wolfram. He's fairly well known.
Yeah, I know the name.
He's written a number of computer languages. I mean, in the world of science, he's a pretty heavy hitter. His team just, sent me an email today and asked, for a couple of sections around that idea because they volunteered to look at it with me. But quantum mechanics is weird. Oh, yeah, to say the least. It doesn't make any sense. And that is, the underlying, I guess, motivation for me. Because I've spent basically my entire life studying, physics, although I studied less physics than the other things, but, anomalies, UAP, remote viewing, NDEs, those were always extremely interesting to me ever since I was a kid. Mm-hmm. And, the physics, but then also, ancient civilizations. Basically, I always wanted to look at the things that didn't make any darn sense. Right. And after years and years of doing that, I started to kind of get this feeling, and I think a lot of people, feel this way about these topics. Something is connecting these things. And And, but what the heck is it?
Right. Yeah. Where's that missing piece?
Yeah. What is it? And about 3 years ago, I was watching a video on YouTube, and it was Jesse Michaels, who's got, what is his podcast called? American Alchemy.
Oh, okay.
And he had on this video Eric Weinstein, mathematician, and Hal Puthoff. I don't know if you're familiar with Hal Puthoff.
I am.
So Hal actually has looked at some of this for me, and offered some advice to me and guidance on some of the science stuff. But I'm watching this video with the three of them, and they're talking about UAP and remote viewing. And Hal doesn't quite say it, but he kind of alludes to it that, maybe, I think he was specifically talking about remote viewing. Maybe there's something underlying the physical universe that's got to do with information. And I was like, that's pretty interesting. And just kind of filed it, in the back of my mind, but started thinking about, different things that I was studying, anomalies and whatnot. Started thinking about it a little bit more along those lines. And so, fast forward a couple of years, and I'm talking to my trusty ChatGPT one day, and we were talking about remote viewing. I had actually done a number of experiments. I'm also trained in remote viewing.
Oh, okay. Where'd you get trained?
I trained with Lori Williams.
Okay.
She trained with Lynn Buchanan, and I've actually had brief conversations with both Lynn and Lori. But yeah, I trained with Lori, and so remote viewing. And shortly I'll tell you a story about that. It's a great story.
Okay.
But I'm talking to ChatGPT and I had done a number of experiments with ChatGPT to see if AI could remote view, and I'm not the only guy doing that, but nobody's really published anything on it. So I'd scour the internet, and I'd talk to different people like Paul Smith. He was an Army remote viewer in the Defense Department program, and he'd say, people are working on it, but nobody really has anything yet. So I just started trying it myself to see how well ChatGPT could remote view. Pretty inconclusive, but pretty interesting. And so I end up having a conversation with ChatGPT about remote viewing and so on. And I said, it just kind of came to me almost out of nowhere, because I'm asking it, what are some possibilities? I always wanted to know that about remote viewing. What is the mechanism?
Yeah.
There's no particle. Every test imaginable has been done to try to isolate what's the mechanism behind remote viewing, and nobody's been able to find it. So I'm having that conversation with ChatGPT, what could be behind this? It doesn't know, of course.
Yeah.
And it just kind of pops into my head. I said, well, I've heard people say that it's possible that, somehow the basis of reality could be informational.
Right.
I said, so if the basis of reality is informational, how would remote viewing work then? And it came back and said, well, if information is fundamental to reality, then remote viewing isn't viewing at all, and it's not transmission at all. It's probably a querying of the information.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, well, that's interesting. And so that's kind of where it started. That was going on a year ago.
Okay. And
so I just started following, that line of inquiry. And what I found was, and that's all I was interested in that day, was trying to figure out, hey, is there any insight here that I can glean from AI about, remote viewing functionality? Mm-hmm. And lo and behold, I start down that path, and everything looks different if you take what I call an information first perspective. So, from there I move on to UAP, which I think is a super interesting topic, but I know you guys get into that a lot.
Yeah, and I think there's probably a lot of different things going on there, but I'm sure this easily applies to some of those explanations.
Now, I will tell you that on some of the more anomalous things, I mean, this gets into, not just remote viewing, but NDE and, even religious experiences, UAP. The book does not, quote unquote, solve the UAP question, but UAP looks an awful lot different through an information first lens. I'll give you, for instance, Gary Nolan, who you're familiar with Gary Nolan's work.
Yep.
Gary Nolan, he did a bunch of spectrometry and other tests on some, alleged recovered materials.
Yeah.
Supposedly
exotic stuff, right?
Yeah, pieces of craft and exotic things. And he finds some interesting things, but they don't necessarily really tell you much other than that these materials would be extremely difficult to make.
Right.
Like micron scale layers, which is, it's basically a few atoms thick. it's extremely complicated material science to try to do that. You could do it, but I don't. And I think he said this too. I don't understand why you would.
Right. That's the thing.
Just as a hoax, because and one of the things that I remembered him saying about it was that you wouldn't do this to make something fly better, right? And so I went back and read a bunch of his work on those materials, and then I did some research into, would there be any inherent benefit to materials constructed that way if it wasn't a craft in the way that we think of it. And I kind of looked at it from the perspective of, okay, well, what if it's an information handling device? What if it's more a microprocessor than it is a wing? Right?
Okay.
And I came away from that convinced. Now, it's far enough advanced, or seemingly, it's far enough advanced that it wouldn't necessarily meet our specs for a microprocessor, but it wouldn't be outside the realm of possibility that those materials they don't have anything to do with flight, because these craft are not flying. And personally, what I believe is probably happening with the majority of these craft is, they're not vehicles in the sense that we think of vehicles. They're reality rewriters. They're an interface mechanism that allows, that, of course, we call it craft because what else would you call it?
Right.
But that allows that craft to recode reality at the local level. And so if you look at, and then you take that idea and you apply it, okay, well, what do we know about these quote unquote craft? Well, we know that they accelerate and decelerate in a way that is just beyond what our physics tells us is possible, and in a way that would absolutely obliterate anyone inside. Right? From 0 to 30,000 miles an hour in a split second.
Oh yeah.
I mean, that's just it's what makes these so difficult for kind of regular folks to believe.
You would either have to have some kind of inertial dampener that you wouldn't feel it, or it would have to be unmanned if it was a craft.
Or it would have to not be a craft. Because 0 to 30,000 miles an hour, and that gets into the whole other thing with UAP. It's like I've been listening to a few podcasts lately, and I listened to one that you guys did here not too long ago, and some of the conversation was about, okay, using material physics, how would we do this? I listened to one the other day, and a guy was arguing that, if we just use Einsteinian relativity, you'd be able to get a craft from point A to point B as long, assuming you solved the food problem, assuming you solved the engineering, assuming that you solved the propulsion problem, assuming that you solved the fuel problem, that you'd be there in no time, a matter of 100,000 years or less. And and now I look at things through this information first lens, and I really have a hard time kind of not giggling to myself when I hear speculation like that, because you're trying to solve the problem with our physics, and our physics are material. Now, I'm not saying our physics aren't true. They're absolutely true. They're true for matter. But
that's a good way of putting it. I like that.
Yeah, it is true. Yeah, you couldn't do this with a craft. And I think I'm safe in saying I don't think we're going to develop a technology that lets the occupant of a vehicle that goes from 0 to 30,000 or 150 miles an hour to 30,000 miles an hour in a fraction of a second and is not liquefied inside it.
Yeah.
I don't think. And you hear guys like Stephen Greer talk about anti-gravitic and electromagnetic propulsion and all that stuff. And I mean, I'm not going to fault somebody for speculating about what's possible. I mean, that's how we get places. But at the same time, there are some problems that I just don't believe you're going to solve with engineering, in that way.
I'd also like to say that conversation definitely didn't happen on this show.
That one was a different. I can't remember. I think it was the anomalous. I can't remember what it's called, but the anomalous podcast or something.
Oh, okay. I just wanted to clear that up in case someone thought they missed something.
No. I listened to one of yours that discussed something tangential to that, but if they're not craft. Okay. If the underlying substrate of reality, if the basis of, the universe and existence is actually information, then you don't need propulsion. And it's a lot more in line with how we appear to see these things behave. Especially like cross domain. They go from air, undersea,
right.
So on, seemingly disappear into mountains. if reality is based upon the information and you have the technical capability, the know-how to manipulate the information, then the problems, the problems with reality would not exist for you. The problems with inertia wouldn't be there. The problems with, the mountain being in the way. From an informational standpoint, the mountain isn't in the way. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, good. But anyway, so that's how, UAP kind of was the next topic that I evaluated through, this information first lens. And then naturally that took me to, my 3 or 4 other obsessions, which is religion. And, I grew up Catholic, fairly religious tradition, but, I don't know if you've ever known any Catholics or whatever, but
yes, plenty.
It's a lot less of a, quote unquote spiritual thing than it is a tradition, but,
right.
Just kind of how I think it tends to be approached by Catholics, but still, I went to Catholic school and went to church every Sunday. And when I was 11, I found out that there was no Santa Claus. And it was such a betrayal. I was like, well, wait a minute. What else sounds like this? Fantasy, almost explanations for things. And so kind of immediately after that, I was like, well, now I got to look at religion, because that sounds the same kind of made up that Santa Claus is.
Right.
And, that led to, ultimately I became an atheist, although I don't know that I would specifically use that term now, but I was always fascinated by religion because as somebody who was also, studying science throughout my life, I found a lot of the answers to the questions exist. Maybe the 2 or 3 really big ones we don't have, but
yeah,
where did people come from? We know that. How did the planets get there? We know that. And so I was always fascinated with how religion even still exists, because if you follow the materialist viewpoint, which is that religion exists because people had questions and they didn't have answers to them, right? And they, psychologically, they need this assurance that that their world is not pure chaos.
Yeah,
that it isn't something where no one's in control, right? And I'm not saying that that's not true. That people need that. I'm sure that they do, but I started looking at religion through this information first lens, and I was amazed at what I found. If you break down like and I don't mean most, I mean nearly every religion ever that we know enough about to be able to say, okay, here's basically what it is. All of them carry essentially the same informational payload at their core.
Which would be what?
You're not alone. What you do, think, and say matter. They have a consequence in reality. That you should be decent to the people around you.
Right.
You should care for people who need your help. There's a couple of others, but I couldn't kind of wrap my head around that. It's like, okay, well, why would they all say the same thing, right? And this was before I started calling it things like reality first and underlying substrate. But I started really evaluating that, and what I found is that, and this is kind of where I came up with the basis for the theory, I guess, is the underlying substrate of reality. It's not just how things exist. It's not just the process by which probability turns into matter. It has a bias, right, toward what I've found to be informational coherence. So that bias causes matter to come together in certain ways. It causes biology to form and evolve in certain ways. It causes, tribes and societies and civilizations to do the same, form and, come together and thrive, because it has this bias towards at least informational coherence, congruency. And so I almost started treating this underlying substrate like a person, because it seems to want something. And I mean, that's when things kind of got crazy, because seriously, because if information is the underlying substrate and it has a bias towards informational coherence, then that means gravity doesn't have a darn thing to do with mass.
Why would you say that?
Well, because the mass is just a byproduct of the information. And so if you look at gravity, and this is why I asked Stephen Wolfram and some of these other guys to please help, please destroy my theory. Truly, because if gravity isn't primarily to do with mass, and it's primarily to do with these, underlying informational structures, then I mean, it's difficult to difficult to even get it out. Just some guy from Ohio who runs a marketing company. And now I'm saying Einstein had it wrong. I don't know. It's interesting, but it's also not fun at the same time. But if I'm right, then it's true. There's no such thing as space-time. Frankly, space-time is a map that we use. It isn't the continent. Gravity couldn't have more to do with mass than it does the underlying informational structure. Which it makes sense if the underlying informational substrate has a bias towards informational coherence, then it would draw material to other material based on that. And so I took that concept and I evaluated that against what we know about us, civilizations and people and living things. It kind of blew my mind. So look at the trajectory of say a civilization. You've got, let's just paint the picture for you. You start out with a tribe, right? There's a tribe and they live by the river because, it's useful to them. And they kind of get to, they're thriving. They get to a point where they, they start to grow. So then they need, rules and laws and societal structures and so on. And over time, what happens is if the informational coherence, continues to remain intact and continues to improve, then other people come to this society. It draws them in, till eventually, you've got a giant, sprawling city, and it becomes a city state, and then it becomes a state in earnest, and a nation, and so on. And same thing with religions. If you have a religion that is, the message makes sense, and the encoding of the message. Of course, we call that dogma. The dogma is the encoding around the message. We can get into that too, but the underlying message is the same. You're not alone. Stick together. Help each other. Don't do things that threaten the coherence of your group. Right. But a religion that does very well at that will also draw adherence to it. It will draw membership. And it was an interesting moment when I came up with this. I was writing and researching, looking things up, and kind of happened over a few minutes. I looked over at my wife. I said, "You're not going to believe this." Of course, by that time, she's not going to be surprised by anything that comes out of my mouth after I said gravity doesn't exist. But I said, why would it be the case that this is true? That this idea that informational coherence draws things in, right? Why would that be true for, biological systems? Why would that be true for civilizations? Why would that be true for religions? Why would it be true for songs and paintings? Myriad other things that science tells us don't have a darn thing to do with science. Okay?
Yeah.
Why would it be true for all those things for this reason, informational coherence, and be true for celestial bodies for a different reason completely?
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense.
Kind of incoherent, isn't it?
Well, sort of. I mean, the way you're laying it out, it makes sense. I mean, cause I'm not by any means objecting to the idea that everything's information. I've been thinking that as an explanation for a while now. You're just taking it to another level is what you're doing.
Well, I'm testing it. I'm testing it against, what's out there to test it against. And I actually have a file that's it's a thick file with a number of physics experiments that could be done that could possibly disprove what I'm saying.
Okay.
But unfortunately, I don't have a
lab,
like a proton interferometer. Matter of fact, I talked to Dean Radin about this, parapsychology guy.
Yes.
He wrote The Conscious Universe, and I think he runs IONS, the Noetic Sciences organization. And I don't want to talk out of turn. I don't know if I can say everything he told me, but basically, I said to him, maybe Santa Claus will get me a proton interferometer for Christmas. But I would consider that just a tremendous win if this idea got to the point where, some people like Dean or some of the people he works with could put some of this stuff to the test. I think that would be terrific. But in the meanwhile, all I can do is what I can do, which is, kind of apply this frame to different things that, that seem like we're having a tough time understanding them. See what that looks like, when you look at it that way. And darned if I have found anything yet that doesn't yield what appears to be something useful.
Well, let me ask you this. We're talking about remote viewing. Yeah. And one of the things I remember remote viewers saying is that their accuracy was much higher when they were let in on the target afterwards than when they're not.
Well, that is debated. I think generally that is true. But it's anecdotal. I mean, the statistical evidence about it, some of the best examples of remote viewing that have ever been documented were, up to the point that they were evaluated, were zero feedback events.
Okay.
Like, for instance, Joe McMoneagle, about Joe?
Of course.
There's a few that he did that are extremely famous in the remote viewing world. One of them was, I think it was in West Virginia. He had been tasked with something, and he ended up describing a military installation that was absolutely secret. And it wasn't even the target that he was given. I think it was just a practice target he was doing that was geographical coordinates. And he ended up kind of being pulled over to this secret installation. He described it, he drew it, sketched it. And that was kind of one of the things that made him very useful at that, is not only could he remote view, but he was pretty good at sketching things too.
Yeah.
But he described this facility, and I think when it made its way up the chain, they came knocking. They're like, "What the heck is going on here? How did you guys know about this?" And he was never given any feedback on that, I think, the entire time he was in the military. It wasn't until a lot later. Now, it could be argued that if he ever got the feedback, that changes it. But and I've talked to Paul Smith about this too, and he said the jury's out on whether feedback. Now, feedback will make you better at remote viewing. If you look at it as like a martial art, or even like, whatever, you get a new job and you're a telemarketer and, they just throw you to the wolves. Yeah, you might do okay. If they sit you down after every phone call, play it back for you, show you exactly where you went off script, so on and so forth, you're going to get a lot better at it.
Sure.
And so I think that there is something to that part of it, but I'm not convinced that remote viewing, the functionality of it is seeing the future feedback. I'm not convinced of that at all.
Well, I know I think it was Joe McMoneagle also said that sometimes he would be remote viewing the place before he even got there, without even knowing what his target was. He would start getting imagery. Yeah. And I think his thoughts were that, because he was the one, I think, that pointed out that he thought it was feedback related, and he thought he was getting the information from the future.
I'm not saying that isn't possible. If information is the fundamental substrate of reality, there's no such thing as the future.
Right.
There's just data that, I guess I look at it like this. If all time is in an information first reality, all time is the order, it's the computational rendering order.
Mm-hmm. Well, like a video game, the whole thing is already there. It's just a matter of proceeding through it.
Yeah, and that's a good analogy too for the UAP thing, like 30,000 miles an hour in a fraction of a second. You know what that sounds like to me? That sounds like you didn't really move at all. You just were here and then you were there.
Right.
Well, I'm not much of a gamer, but I know enough about them to say this confidently. If you're writing software for a game, you are not going to write software that requires a character to physically travel from point A to point B if there's nobody watching them go from point A to point B.
Yeah.
You're just going to write it so that they were here and then they're there.
Sure.
Which is, seems like what you see, with UAP. But sorry, I went off on a tangent there.
No, that's all right.
Podcasts are about tangents, really, aren't they?
Yeah, pretty much, especially this one. There was something else I was going to say about that, though. It also brings to mind the idea of apports and, things just appearing and disappearing.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's what you'd expect. It's what you'd expect in an information first, situation. It's not different than what the particle does, right?
Yeah.
In a quantum mechanics situation, the particle does the exact same thing. It's not there until it needs to be there.
Right.
Now, what on the NDE thing, what I don't know is what they are, or why they're here. I've got some ideas. I'm happy to speculate with you.
Oh,
about
sure,
that.
absolutely.
But in the book, I try to fly pretty straight with this stuff because the difference between a good idea that somebody might take seriously and a really entertaining thing that that certain folks won't is if you start acting like you know everything.
Sure.
And I definitely don't. But I think that all the same things that we think about in terms of what are they? I think that question remains, and boy, would I love to know the answer to it. This more addresses how could they do that?
Yeah.
But
More the mechanism than the explanation behind it.
Yeah, more of a hint at the mechanism. But if you look at the direction that quantum computing looks like it's headed, I don't think that collapsing those probabilities using metamaterials and observing but not observing. I don't think that is too many steps away from whatever it is that UAPs do. If I'm right, if it's manipulating reality through, for lack of a better way to say it, being able to manipulate and rewrite the code of reality in real time, I think that quantum computing is probably eventually what teaches us to do that. But they could be from Alpha Centauri, and they could be ultra-terrestrials, and they could be future humans. All of those are interesting ideas. I think they're all just as good as any other.
Right.
It could be all those things.
Right. And that's the thing with a lot of paranormal phenomena is it could be many more than just one thing. There's not necessarily one explanation for ghosts or UAPs or whatever. There's likely numerous things going on, and they just look similar.
Yeah, and if the underlying structure of reality is the information, that contains it, then all of those things are no longer weird. They're no longer, they're not breaking physics.
Right.
Are you familiar with any work from Ed Kelly?
I'm not sure.
He wrote a couple of books. He wrote The Irreducible Mind.
Okay, I've heard of that.
And he wrote another one later called Beyond Physicalism.
That one I have not heard of.
That's the newer one. I'm reading Irreducible Mind right now. And he wrote it with a bunch of other guys that contributed. I think Dean Radin contributed, and I'm over 40 now. That's the new thing. If you need to remember it, you won't remember it until 15 minutes later. But a number of other people, and I've been kind of talking to Ed. He's reading one of my chapters right now, and he was really putting it to me with some of the NDE stuff. He's like, people come back and they have information that they wouldn't have had access to.
Right.
And I'm like, well, but that's essentially the same. It's essentially the same result that a remote viewer gets, albeit seemingly better access.
Yeah.
In an NDE, but I think it's a querying of information, from the substrate. In the book, I say consciousness exists as an interface between physical reality and the underlying substrate. I think it's essentially its purpose. I stop short of saying that consciousness is fundamental, and I think that's where I turn some people off. Like, Dean Radin, I don't think is ready to jump on the bandwagon with it. And a lot of these guys, for about 100 years, this is actually more than 100 years. This has been, in the parapsychology world, it's been, well, listen, if it takes a consciousness to collapse the probability down to a particle, then, that's an indication that the underlying thing is consciousness. If consciousness is what, comes back from an NDE with information, then the whole thing must be consciousness. I don't believe that. And I don't think that it, cheapens our existence if it's not the case either. I think an NDE, and I don't actually say this in the book, I'm just giving you my opinion about it, but
that's fine.
I think an NDE is a situation where kind of your consciousness achieves, a very wide aperture with the informational substrate.
Okay. All right.
To the point where, and I think it was Ed. He said, yeah, but people see themselves from above the table.
Right.
And I'm like, well, yeah, but there you guys go being physicalists again. And if you call a guy like Ed Kelly a physicalist, you're basically challenging him to a fist fight. But, and I didn't say it that way, but, basically, if it's information, it doesn't matter where the heck you are. You can query the data and access and compile it from any perspective you want it to. Perhaps that's just a psychological anchor is the thing that's happening to you on the table, and so you're seeing it from that perspective. What other perspective would your consciousness want to see it from? Under the table?
Right. And that's one of the things that they were doing at one point is they were putting the messages up top near the ceiling.
Oh yeah.
And no one ever I don't think anyone ever saw them, and they're like, well, that's also not important to the person. Like, the person is what's important to them is what's happening to them. They're not looking around going, are there any signs to read?
No, some people did see them.
Did they? Okay.
Yeah, some of those experiments were a success. Now, just like with remote viewing, okay, is, an outside, skeptical person, and there's nothing wrong with being a skeptical person,
No, absolutely not.
You should not believe everything that you hear,
Yeah, you should question everything.
Yeah, you definitely should. So, but a outside skeptical person kind of looks at that and says, well, yeah, but they only were, 60 or 70% accurate in what they described about half the time.
Yeah.
Well, what do you think it should be if it's bogus?
Right.
It should be essentially darn near 0%, darn near 100% of the time.
Yeah, yeah.
Can I tell you quick how I arrived at remote viewing? Can I tell you that story real quick? Yes,
please do.
All right. So I guess it's been about 2-3 years ago. I was reading a book by Ingo Swann called Penetration. Mm-hmm. Pretty famous book.
Yep.
Amongst crazy people like us. And I'm reading it, and I'm like, man, this guy's he's so interesting. And I've read a number of other things that he did because he's just fun to read. Interesting mind.
Yeah.
And I'm reading this book, and I'm like, I'm a skeptical person. I don't just believe things. I'd read a book, a novel in middle school that talked about remote viewing, and I remember enjoying the book, and I thought it was an interesting concept. But 12 years old, okay, it's like being a psychic. Okay, cool. Finish the book and move on. Well, then I kind of come back to it a few years ago. I'm reading Ingo's book, and what I noticed was that he didn't seem crazy. He was talking about these things that happen matter of factly, and I'm more talking about the first part of the book, not the Martian aliens thing later. But
right.
Or I'm sorry, aliens on the moon. I guess it was.
I think there was something for Mars too.
And even he. I don't know if these things are true, He's like,
and even he doubted them.
Yeah, he definitely did. But the first part where he's talking about, the remote viewing stuff, semi-scientifically. So after that, I got Lynn Buchanan's book. Like before I was done with Penetration, I'd ordered, I think it's called The Seventh Sense from Lynn Buchanan, who taught Lori, who ended up teaching me. But so I'm about halfway through Lynn's book, and it was a quiet Saturday morning because my kids were at my parents' house staying overnight. So it was just me and my wife home. It was Saturday morning, 9:30, and she's out on the back patio reading and drinking coffee. And I'm sitting in the living room doing the same thing, reading and drinking my coffee. And I'm about halfway through Lynn's book, and I set it down, and I said, I can't keep doing this. The problem is that these people, as they're telling these stories in these books and podcasts and, YouTube videos and stuff, they don't strike me as being full of crap. Now, my background is sales and marketing. It'll be 26 years in November that I've been in sales and marketing. I own and run a marketing and PR agency. I mean, I'm not patting myself on the back, but, I'm very good at understanding what motivates people to do things. Mm-hmm. Okay. And I was not seeing in people like Lynn and people like Ingo and, Paul, Lori, I was not seeing the things that I need to see to be able to check the box and say, yep, these people are con artists, right? There are things to look for, and I was not seeing those things. So I said, okay, well, I've read enough of Lynn's book now that I think I have an understanding of how this basically works. So I set the book down, I walked into another room, and I opened up a junk drawer, and I'm looking for something in this junk drawer that I can, put in my pocket or hide. I'm going to do an experiment, okay? So I find something in the junk drawer, and I take out a Post-it note, and I write the number, a 4-digit number that just randomly I picked. I wrote it on the Post-it note, and I wrapped the Post-it note around the object, and I put it in my pocket for a couple of reasons: to assign a number to it and to obscure what it could be. I got a piece of paper and a pen. I walked out to the back patio. I opened the door, and I told my wife, I want you to do everything I say and don't think, just do what I say. She's like, okay, kind of brave, but I said, come in here. So she comes in, she sits down on the sofa, coffee table in front of her. I set a piece of paper down on a coffee table. I set a pen in front of her. I said, I'm going to give you a 4-digit number. I want you to write it down on this piece of paper. Then I want you to just make whatever random squiggle, just make a mark on the paper. And then I want you to using only nouns, only describing words, no nouns. I want you to describe what's in my pocket. She says, okay. I give her the number. She writes the number down. I said, all right, make the squiggly line. She does that. I said, now describe the object in my pocket, using those types of words. And she writes down round, blue. Or, matter of fact, I think she wrote green. Round, green, smooth. I said, anything else? She said, no. I said, now sketch it. She drew a circle. She put 2 squiggly lines inside the circle. I said, are you done? She said, yeah. She put the pen down. In my pocket was a marble, like a kid's marble, glass marble. And it was round and it was smooth and it was green and blue, but definitely green. And basically, my life was never the same after that. I'm serious. You have these moments where it's like, it was different before than it is now. And that was the case. I don't know that I've really got the words to say what that did, because prior to that, I was fully convinced that there was nothing that wasn't explainable.
Like with a materialistic paradigm type of thing?
Yeah. Oh, I was fully materialist prior to that. Fully physicalist. Like, there might be things we don't understand yet, but we will understand them, and it will be because of physics and material science and things along those lines. And here was this thing that should not happen. In fact, it can't. It cannot happen if the world, the universe, is material.
Right.
If there is no particle, if there is no field, what mechanism could possibly exist to put information about the marble in my pocket inside my wife's skull? Nothing. There's nothing. And Stefan Schwartz, who I talked to him a week or two ago, and he's done maybe more remote viewing experiments than anyone else on Earth. He was doing remote viewing experiments as part of the Edgar Cayce organization before the Army ever heard of remote viewing. And I've read a couple of papers that he's done. They have exhaustively evaluated whether, through shielding and all other kinds of protocols, there is no possible way that any particle or wave that we understand to exist is transmitting data from wherever to inside people's minds. It's just not what's happening. But that's the story. That's where things got weird.
Right.
And before that, I was interested in UFOs, but more of the science stuff, more science, religion from a sociological perspective. It was only after that I was like, well, if she can know about the marble, then who says, Our Lady of Fatima can't have happened, right?
Right.
So the door opened that morning. And I doubled down. I just became, obsessed with trying to understand. And, a lot of people want to remote view because they think it's neat, or, they have this drive to, you hear a lot of people like in remote viewing classes and stuff. Well, I want to help the police find missing children. I mean, if I was capable of helping the police find missing children, I would.
Right.
But that's not, that's not a driver that wasn't a driver for me. And it would be cool if you could guess the lottery numbers or whatever. That would be certainly useful.
Sure.
But for me, it wasn't about that. I wanted to know how. And if you talk to Lori Williams, she'll probably tell you, Ryan was a little bit of a pain in the butt. Because everybody else is, talking about the protocol and the processes involved and, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. And Ryan's like, but how does it work?
Right. And I mean, from my own personal perspective, that's how I went into like magical practice. This stuff is not real. Like this doesn't, and then I tried stuff and I went, oh, that actually did something. Well, how can I narrow it down to see what's actually doing something versus what's just the window dressing?
I was hoping you'd bring that up because, I've listened to a handful of your programs, and I instantly liked it because for years, I grew up listening to Coast to Coast, love it, and I even loved George Norrie better than Art Bell.
I'm kind of the same. I don't know. I wasn't listening when Art Bell was doing it, and
I wasn't either.
I went back and listened to like when Graham Hancock was on and stuff, and I went, I kind of like the George Norrie episodes more. And people were like, no, you can't do that. And I'm like, I'm sorry.
Oh, you'll get run out of town on a rail talking like that to some people.
And it wasn't it wasn't that I didn't like Art Bell. There was something about the way George Norrie approached it I thought was easier I liked it better, Well, since we're doing tangents, I'll do a tangent about Coast to Coast. Because what I did was I would go to bed at night with headphones on because Coast to Coast didn't come on until after I went to bed. And I would put the headphones on and be listening to, whatever the AM radio station was. And that way I would hear it while I was sleeping. And let me tell you what, you want to have some crazy dreams at night.
beam coast to coast into your ears while you're sleeping, right? But yeah, the reason I like Nori better than Bell, and I you go back and listen to old episodes. I mean, Art Bell, he was a phenomenon.
Yeah,
no question about it. But in broadcasting and just the concept of it, and the guy wouldn't quit. He never quit.
Yeah.
But Nori, I think it's his voice, to be frank. Because the one thing that Art Bell did well was he would let you tell the story, he would entertain the concept, but he didn't necessarily ever really believe you. And George is kind of the flip side of that.
That's true.
It's like if you just casually listen to George, like listen to 5 episodes in a row, and he'll seem like he believes all 5 things, and 4 of them are contradictory. But it's a job. He does it well.
Yeah, and I mean, like at some point I was listening thinking, well, why don't they ask more in-depth questions? He's obviously not reading the books. And then I'm realizing, okay, he has 2 guests a night, 4 nights a week. That's an awful lot of reading and research to do.
Yeah, it's a hard job. And when you have a voice like that, how hard do you really have to work anyway?
Well, that's true.
Radio. But I listened to, some of your stuff, and I heard you guys talk about magic, on a few different episodes.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was hoping that you'd bring that up, because that's what's fun about this information first thing, is you can look at weird things and see it differently.
Right.
So if information is the fundamental substrate of reality, it's what underlies material existence. If consciousness is the interface with that, then why wouldn't praying work? Why wouldn't magic work? Now, I will say this, and I think we can say this empirically, even if I'm right, consciousness is an extremely weak interface with that substrate, right? Remote viewing does not allow you to pick the lottery numbers.
Right.
And so so you'd expect the same kind of incremental, kind of success on the margins out of any of these things, whether it's, RV or the religious and spiritual stuff, or magic, which is, probably kind of something along the lines of right down the middle of the two.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't it work? We know that intention focus changes the outcome of, random number generators. And
right.
Have you ever heard of Roger Nelson?
I don't know.
Global Consciousness Project?
Yes.
So, and I've spoken to Roger too about this. He's had random number generators all over the world for like 40 years.
Yep.
And they measure what the behavior is of these random number generators around the time of really, really serious, like global events, like 9/11, like, stuff like that. And darned if every one of these major things doesn't see, a statistical effect.
Which is just fascinating.
Intention focus. Stephen Schwartz, talks about the same thing. He's written a number of papers on it. Intention focus has an effect on reality. Well, guess what? If consciousness is an interface with the underlying substrate, you wouldn't expect, one person's brain to, alter the orbit of Venus.
Right.
But micro edits. Okay.
Yeah.
That's how I look at them, is they're micro edits. Well, a prayer would work just as, the same way as a micro edit. So would an incantation, and so would the magic stuff. I mean, of course it would. And some people would be better at it than others. And,
sure,
more people, wanting an outcome would probably be more successful than fewer. But, why wouldn't it?
We got to take a quick break. We'll be right back. Quick mid-show break here. Some contact info and a recommendation, maybe. Contact info, simple. wheredidtheroadgo.com. Everything is there. There's a contact section with all relevant emails. You can send if you have a story you want to talk to us about or have us read on the air. Stories at wheredidtheroadgo.com. If you just want to, if you have something like Ryan here, and you want to come on and talk about something, and you have a serious theory like this, by all means, booking at wheredidtheroadgo.com. Everything else can go to contact at wheredidtheroadgo.com. But the website also has links to everything else that's out there, all our social media and stuff. And there's a link tree that has all the other stuff I do, including The Last Exit for the Lost, all my photography stuff. Everything's on there. Amazon wish list, everything can be found on that link tree. Pretty sure everything can. Anyway, and that's right at the top of the page. And of course, $3 and you can be a patron of the show, and you get the shows a couple of weeks early. You get them commercial free. You get an extra bonus part of the show after almost every show. I mean, it's rare that we don't have extra content at the end of the show, and sometimes those are even longer than the actual show and a lot more laid back usually. So yeah, for $3 a month, I've never raised the price, and it helps out immensely. I want more people to have the extra content, so I keep it at $3. So that's it. Recommendation, I don't really have a solid recommendation for you this week. I've been kind of racking my brain on it, and I just don't. I did watch the new season of Alice in Borderland, which I didn't even know was going to be a thing. There were rumors at one point. If you haven't seen it, Alice in Borderland is a Japanese manga, I guess, and it resembles the Squid Game in a bit. And I would recommend the Squid Game. The Squid Game is actually really good, despite its overpopularity. It's actually a really good show. But Alice in Borderland is a little crazier and a little more out there. It's fun. I really enjoyed it. The first 2 seasons, I think, are great. The third one, I'm not sure how I feel about it. I just finished it tonight, and it looks like they're actually suggesting a 4th season at the end as well. Because at the end of the 2nd season, they kind of wrap everything up, but they have this one piece that they kind of show you. And they did the same thing at the end of season 3. But initially I heard, well, there was a 3rd series of the manga, so they might, eventually make that, but no one knew, and then suddenly it's just out. And that's on, I believe, Netflix. So I hesitate to recommend it because it's definitely not for everybody. It's basically, I don't want to give too much away, but it's kind of like Squid Game where they have to play games, but they're not necessarily kids' games. It is not a rip-off of the Squid Game. It is very different, and I don't know. I think it's fun anyway. So with that, back to the show. So I am here with Ryan Kralik, and we're talking about how the universe may be made of just information. You definitely are presenting this in a different way than I've heard it presented before. We've had, like I said, I've had people like Jim Elvich on and stuff. He was actually my first guest talking about his book, The Universe Solved. But he takes more of a digital information sort of idea.
Yeah.
Not so much a computer simulation, but that reality is actually digital in form and it's all made of information.
Yeah. So my framework, at first it sounds like that. I get that quite a bit.
No, yours is different. That's the thing. Like I said, I've explored that with him on a couple of shows, but yours, it's a variation on that, but it's almost more complex.
So guys like Donald Hoffman, who he says it but doesn't say it, that the whole thing's a simulation.
Right.
I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that the table in front of me isn't here and it's not a table. I'm not saying that my consciousness, just by virtue of the fact that consciousness and brain processes in and of themselves are creating a model, right? I don't actually see the table. My brain interprets the photon activity.
Right.
As a table. And I think that those guys, they do the same thing, and I'm not faulting any of them for it. They're following the science. All these guys are in a silo, essentially, right? The thing that I think is my strength in bringing a lot of these concepts together is that I don't answer to anybody, and I don't care what anybody thinks.
Good.
Right? I'm not striving for tenure. I've never even been to college, right? So I don't have the blinders on that are kind of inherent when you're in the scholastic world. But a guy like Donald Hoffman, who's ends up in this camp where consciousness is got to be the basis, and furthermore it's all a simulation. I can see how they get there, but ask any regular person on the street to evaluate 5 sentences that detail those types of outlooks, and I mean they roll their eyes. It doesn't pass the smell test, right? Yet things are real.
Right.
I can see them, right? I can see them. I can touch them. They're real.
You get hit in the face. It hurts.
It does hurt. Okay.
Usually.
What I'm saying is, yes, things are real, but they're real here, and the reason that they exist is because of the underlying information. I'm not saying that things are not real. And same with like you mentioned, the digital thing. I was speaking to a friend of mine a few weeks ago, and most people haven't really known that I've been working on this. until I thought it was enough of an idea, and kind of had the book mostly together. I was like, okay, well, if it comes up, I'll say it. I don't mention it to clients, but
right.
But I was talking to a friend of mine, and I was like, oh, well, hey, this is going to happen now, and you might see some things about this, and I basically have a book done. He's like, well, what's it all about? And I tried to explain it to him, and I even had my phone out, and I was like looking at a synopsis, because I hadn't really, verbalized a lot of these things to anybody but maybe my wife. And so I didn't want to screw it up, so I was I kind of had crib notes to give him the synopsis. And he's like, oh yeah, information theory. I'm like, what do you mean? Oh yeah, information theory. You heard me say 5 sentences. You don't know anything about information theory. In the first place, information theory is literally about communications. It's about electrons and wires.
Right.
Right. And he's like, well, yeah, but, simulation theory. I'm like, simulation theory? I didn't say it was a video game. I said, the underlying. So somebody on Twitter the other day, and I told you I hate social media, and I do, but it's like a, guilty
Necessary
pleasure
evil?
or whatever. Yeah. Somebody said it was a question, designed to get you to comment. So I did. They said something like, why did the Big Bang happen? And I said, because it could. And maybe nobody ever read it, or if they did, they didn't understand what I meant. I'm sure both are equally possible. But when you look at people like John Wheeler, who, my book is called It From Us. Well, that's a kind of a take on something that he said. He said it from bit, saying that the physical thing exists because of the information.
Right.
And information has been treated by science as primarily like a record keeping thing. Information exists about the thing. And that's another thing that leads to the consciousness aspect is if there's no consciousness to evaluate the information, then it's irrelevant or whatever. But John Wheeler actually said, every single thing in the universe is the result of the answer to a yes or no question. And, part of some of the theory around information is, so back up a minute. Let's say you could have a box that had the universe in it, right? But the box didn't exist, right? It's just for the sake of the thought experiment. And inside that box was one particle. Well, there's some people that say, well, if there's nothing else, then there can't be, and information can't exist, because the first thing information is it's the differentiation between two things.
All right.
Right. And I chewed on this for weeks. I was like, okay, well, because if information is the underlying structure, if there wasn't anything, it's at some point, if there was nothing, and then arguably the next moment there was something, well, there would already have to be two somethings for information to be the fundamental substrate, right? Because there couldn't be information if there's only one thing. And I just chewed on it. I read a bunch of things, and finally it was AI again helped me with it, and pointed me towards something. And I don't think it was Wheeler. I think it was somebody else. But they said, well, actually, if there was one thing, then the possibility that there could be another thing could represent the differentiation to create the information. And I know I'm getting off in the weeds here.
That's all right. It's
not that interesting, but I think that, again, if I'm right, there probably was a Big Bang because the possibility existed for it to happen against the backdrop of nothing.
Would you need a Big Bang, though? I mean, you could have a steady state universe that always existed with information because time is not necessarily a factor.
Yeah, you could, but you want to know what I love most about information first is there's a bunch of things I don't need anymore. So if I observe the effects of something, like for instance, expansion of the universe, I don't need to put a Band-Aid on it to make it make sense, right? The Big Bang can still have happened. It just happened as a result of informational substrate.
Okay.
There's a number of things that you don't need anymore with information first. You don't need dark matter, which I might add, never been proven to exist.
Oh yeah, that's a big thing with me, because there's more proof behind psychic studies than there is for dark matter, and one's accepted and one's not.
Well, because you can do math problems about
exactly
dark matter, and you can't do math about psychic functioning because But maybe that, if I can just play the tiniest role in just, nudging the thing a little bit, just move it along just a hair, so that some people who actually, are professional thinkers can look at things a little bit differently. I would consider that to be a huge win. But
right.
I did it again. I lost my train of thought.
Well, I wanted to ask you, like, how would you say this differs from, say, holographic theory?
As I understand it, holographic theory says that it's basically like simulation theory. There isn't anything actually there.
Well, so from my understanding of it is that it's being projected from another level of reality.
Well, but why?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, maybe an after effect of something.
So I would call that, and again, I don't fault anybody for theorizing these things because they didn't accidentally find something else. And that's pretty much what happened to me. But a lot of, all these that I've seen are basically rationales to try to make sense of what's in front of us, because what's in front of us doesn't make sense when we drill down to a certain level, which is how you get dark matter. It's how you get dark energy. It's how you get string theory. The mathematics indicate that for this reality to exist in a way that makes sense, those particles must exist, a quadrillion other places. That must be it. Mathematically, we have to create an infinite number of universes to make sense of this. Okay.
Right.
And when I approach this whole thing, just like I try to approach anything, I want the simplest explanation I can get, because that's usually the one that's most accurate. It's a principle in science. I want the theory that relies on the fewest assumptions. And my personal, and I'm a little bit biased, I accept that, but not because I haven't attempted to disprove this framework, or I haven't invited loads of other people to try to help disprove it. I was trying to remember who it was I was talking to. It was somebody fairly well known, and they, and I said to them, "Oh, I remember who it was," and I don't mind saying it out loud. It was Terrence Deacon. He's an anthropologist at Berkeley, and he said basically, very politely, I'm not accusing him of being impolite or anything like that, but he basically said, "Listen, you're misinterpreting my work." And I said, "Oh, well, I get what you're saying." And he's like, this is pseudoscience. And I said, "Yeah, I understand your perspective. And if you don't want me to cite your work, here's where I cited you. If you don't want me to use it, I won't." And he came back and he said, "Well, no, you can use it. You've treated it fairly."
Okay.
He said, "But it's pseudoscience." And he kind of takes me. A lot of these guys like to do this. They take you off in the weeds about, okay, well, you're saying that meaning, you're using the psychological definition of meaning, when the physics definition of meaning, you have to strip all the, it's not meaning in the human sense. And I'm like, well, no, you're not accurate there. If information is the fundamental substrate, then meaning is the same for atoms as it is for people. Right? It's just the walls of these silos start to evaporate. But he's, and he was like, "Yeah, it's pseudoscience." And I'm like, well, I appreciate your perspective, but, and I told him, I said, by all means, prove me wrong. I said, I would actually consider it a major accomplishment to be proven wrong by Terrence Deacon. Do it, please. And I wasn't being a smart aleck.
Right,
I'm serious.
Right.
Because you know what? If somebody would prove me wrong, I could put this thing down and go home. I have a regular job. I have kids. If we went in the other room and asked my wife what she thought about this whole thing, oh man, you'd have a whole other episode. Just listening to her talk about, how inconvenient it is,
right,
to be a dog with a bone like this, and it's true. But
did he try to prove you wrong?
I wouldn't say that he tried to prove me wrong. No, I'm not pretending that he's that interested in what I think. Just, I had asked him, "Hey, would you look at this? I cited some of your work. Would you give me your opinion on these aspects of it as it relates to your," and that's what I did with a lot of these guys. And, some of them have been extremely helpful. And I'm a nerd. Okay. Not like a real life nerd, but like when I'm at home, I'm a nerd.
Okay.
If you go like there's 3 books on the end table, and they're nerd books, right? But several weeks ago, because I'm at that point now in the book where I'm like, okay, I got citations. I'm up to my eyeballs in references in this book, and I feel like they've been thoroughly researched, but I could really use some outside help making sure that I'm not, because I'm not a scientist. I don't want to find out whatever too far down the road that I misunderstood something, or
right.
I thought I was being thorough and wasn't. So I started reaching out to people, and I don't know. I guess I have no shame. I'm not afraid to reach out to anybody. So I reached out to Rupert Sheldrake.
And what did he have to say about it?
Oh, I mean, this was an email exchange.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's also kind of one of the highlights of my life. and I played in a band with the original drummer from Pearl Jam.
Oh,
and
nice.
still, and Pearl Jam's my favorite band, and still, this is still one of the absolute high points of my life. Is Rupert, Dr. Sheldrake's assistant, sends me an email. She's like, I'm going to pass this along to Dr. Sheldrake. She's like, he's like, he's going to tell you to read this book that he wrote. So I'm like, okay, I appreciate that. So this is like a Saturday morning. I buy the book immediately. I'm like, oh, I should read it anyway. It's the book where he, basically coins the idea of morphic resonance. And
okay. Yeah.
I'd watched a number of his lectures and stuff, but I hadn't read the book. And so I get the book and, it's there in my Kindle and I'm thinking, whatever, I'll read it. Maybe several weeks from now, he'll respond or whatever. And I had sent a synopsis, of the book, like a 1-page kind of thing. And, it was like a half hour later, there's a email from Rupert Sheldrake. And I told my wife and she goes, who? I'm like, it doesn't matter who, okay? But he basically told me that these guys will stop short of telling you that you're a genius and you've changed the world. That's not what they give you coming out. But
no.
He expressed harmony between what I was saying and some of the things that he has been saying and has come to believe. He didn't necessarily like some of the terminology I'd settled on.
Okay.
I could not say all due respect seriously enough about Rupert Sheldrake before I say this. But I settled on the terminology that I've settled on because I think it's the most sound in fact, right? And I think Dr. Sheldrake is maybe a little bit more poetic than I am. And so he had some opinions. He was like, hey, he's like, I like this word better because it doesn't have, some of the connotations. And I get this a lot from science people because they're from those schools of thought where there are some things that you don't call things because it's confusing. Okay, right, fair enough. Right. But first of all, I'm writing a trade book. I'm writing a book for people like me, not necessarily people like doctors.
Right.
But also, what I think is more important than that is if, just like we talked a little while ago about gravity, if it's true for all of these aspects of civilization and art and, things where you almost can't dispute that it's the informational congruency, coherence, fortitude of those things that draws people to them. But then you've got gravity where you're saying, no, it follows the same rule, but for a different reason, right? Once you bridge that gap and it's okay, but they're not two domains, right? Meaning, to me as a person, informational coherence, to me as a person, is the same as the informational coherence that leads to the moon being drawn to the Earth. It's for the same underlying reason. It's two different languages describing the same thing. If that makes any sense. But
yeah.
But obviously having a conversation with Rupert Sheldrake was like, pretty much the coolest thing that's ever happened to me.
And what did he think overall?
The impression I got is that he thought I was on the right track, and he found it interesting. You'd have to ask him. I did not come out and say, Mr. Sheldrake, Dr. Sheldrake, do you think I've solved the universe? It's better to play it cool.
Well, sure. And plus, we don't know. There's obviously a lot more research that would have to be done to prove it.
The same thing happened with Hal Puthoff. I expected that he would not. Now, we do know some mutual people, but, I don't, oh, hey, I know so-and-so, so please answer my email. I just, it was like a professional thing. Hey, here's something I'm working on. Would you, if you have a minute, would you take a glance at it? Just toss me any feedback. And at that point, I was looking for people to rip it apart. And I even told him that. I'm like, frankly, this was after he'd given me some feedback on a couple of things. And I sent him another thing and he said, I said, listen, just do not spare me. Rip it to shreds. But he said, it was along the lines of the way that you're thinking about it is in line with how I've been thinking about it. But also guys like Hal Puthoff, and he's a physicist. He's he's looking at it from the standpoint of a physicist,
Right.
the aspects of it that are physics. Dean Radin is looking at it as a psychologist from the aspects of it that are psychological.
Mm-hmm.
Rupert Sheldrake's looking at it from, a biochemistry standpoint about the aspects that are biochemical. And I'm not. The whole thing for me started with, what does all of it have in common? What would have to be true for all of these things to make sense?
Well, we got to stop there because we're out of time, but I want to continue this conversation on a Patreon. So you don't have a publisher for the book yet?
Not yet, but if it does make me feel better, I have turned a couple down.
Oh, interesting.
I have turned a couple down.
But I assume you expect this to be out sooner rather than later.
My guess would be, if everything went really smoothly, my guess would be that it would probably be out sometime first half of next year.
And is there a website or any social media presence that you do pay attention to?
Yeah. I like if you go to, there's a website for the book, itfromus.com.
Okay.
And if you go there, you can get everything else. And matter of fact, I have an article coming out in Ancient Origins this week, which is why I kind of thought, okay, well, maybe it's time to start doing podcasts.
Yeah, but by the time people hear this, it'll be a week or so ago.
Oh, that's okay. It'll still be on there. And
Right.
You haven't told me what day it's coming out yet. I thought it might come out tomorrow, but it's in Ancient Origins, and it's called Hard Drives of the Ancients, Megalithic Architecture as Encoded Memory, that's a whole other aspect we didn't really have time to get into. But
maybe we'll do that on the Patreon because that sounds fascinating.
I'm in.
All right.
But I appreciate you having me on. I really do.
Oh, yeah. No, this has been a fantastic conversation. So thank you.
Anytime.
I want to take a moment here to thank all of my Patreons. Because of you, this show still survives. And it is because of you that I intend to keep going with it. So I want to give a special shout out to those of you who are pledging $10 or more. Greg Ross, Cherry Trapezoid, Tactical Therapist, John Blackburn, Matt in Delaware, Mark Smith, Madeline J, Marty Garza, Gantic, Allison Cook, Super Inframan, 36 Dingo, Trin, Sean Cosgrove, Tim, Matthew Sproul, Ruth Fortescue, Andrew Nichols, Martha, Tyler Glimstead, Christine, Mothman Bren, Mark Brady, D. Esme, Patricia Gaia-Quinta, Kevin Schreck, Linz Jackson K, Charles in Florida, Land of the Crazy and Communicable, Charles Davis, Kristen L, Automaton, Riker and Stark, Abby Allen, Bright Rectangle, Eric Citron, Kevin, American Rambler, Sam Sharon, Tyler Bell, Thunderboy, Eric Todd, Ann Witowski, Vincent Trewell, Will Powell, Barbara Fisher, Schmooples, Devourer of Mortal Souls, Jay, MTK, History and Coffee, Diane B, Beverly Williamson, Jim and Sophie, Andrew Maines, Jonathan Frost, Victoria, John Bracken, Paul Jeffries, Janet's Planet, Ron Dupre, Laser Printer Jam, Perry Peters, Varosh K, MJ Armstrong, Jack Huntington, Laura McLean, Stacy Sherwood, James Lindsay, Linda from Michigan, Billuminati, Strange Stories with the Seeker and Skeptic podcast, Mark Shoemaker, Ron Dupre, Will Cherry, Seed Person, The Ghost Story Guys, Liam Huddock, Harold, Annabelle Smith, Caroline Walker, TDT Skunkworks, Craig Sagastumi, Colin Karras, and Matthew Brown. Thank you all so very, very much for the support. So this full episode ended up being a little shorter than I expected. I didn't realize that when we were recording. I thought we were at time, and it ended up being a little short. So there is a Patreon segment where we get more into this stuff. So if you're a patron, you'll get that very quickly. If you're not, hey, you can become a patron for just $3, $3 whole dollars. And go to Where Did the Road Go? Let me try to talk again. WhereDidTheRoadGo.com. And click on the Patreon link. So if you don't want to support the show that way, but you like the show and want to support us, leaving us a review, a rating, sharing the show, all this stuff helps. And it's all very much appreciated. And I will see you next time. You have been listening to Where Did the Road Go? This show is made possible in part from our Patreons, and we thank you and everyone listening for helping us continue this exploration of the strange. You can always find everything Where Did the Road Go related at www.wheredidtheroadgo.com. And thank you so much for your support.